Good afternoon. Wow. Okay, first of all, this is just incredible and on a crazy cold day, and this is so exciting. Oh my goodness. Okay, I'll do my official welcome. Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us for our Hutchinson Public Library Meet the Author event featuring the book The House of Commons. Thanks to HCVN today, it's being filmed. It'll be on television and also be on their YouTube channel, so feel free to share with others. A big thank you to the HCVN team. Val is running around here, but she's behind the camera. Thank you, Val. Funding for today's author event is made possible thanks to the Friends of the Hutchinson Public Library. A shout out to Jean and Mary and Cindy, their second row, wave to them. Thank you for sponsoring today's event. Well, today we're absolutely thrilled, as I can tell from this crowd size, to welcome Patsy Kahman and her brother and publisher, Andy. I don't want to give too much of their story away, so I'll just tell you, and this is from one of their handouts. The House of Commons was published in the summer of 2023, and the first print run sold out in 6 weeks. It's just incredible, and this is her first book. And the whole thing is just incredible, the buzz on this book. Kathy's here somewhere. She said yes, suggested, way back there, that's the book club coordinator that suggested I bring you in. Certainly this book has been creating a lot of library buzz, and we're thrilled to have Patsy and Andy here with us today to share their unforgettable memoir. And I want to mention that Phil is hiding, but he is another sibling, and he's here today too. So we'll try to get him up later maybe, or at least he'll wave from the audience. Following today's events, Patsy and Andy will be available to sign books, and they'll also have copies available for sale. So with no further ado, here's Patsy and Andy. Thank you.
This is quite a big crowd here. I'm excited on this cold day. My name is Patsy. I'm the second oldest of 12, and this is my brother Andy, who is number 4, and he's also my publisher. And we'll get to the story of that in a minute. And then our brother Phil, number 10. We forget sometimes. He's exactly 10 years younger than I am, and he has this distinction of being named. I got to choose his name. Mom had run out of names. Anyway, so it's been a long journey to get this book written. Can I see a show of hands for how many have already read it? Oh, that's great.
Wow, we're almost done.
Yeah. It helps to know, because sometimes people that have read it have questions that people haven't read it, obviously don't know. So I'd like to start off with just reading a quick introduction. So bear with me. This takes place, the beginning of the book, our parents are 38 years old. And there's 11 of us kids at that point. And the oldest is Carl at that point, who was 13, and Jimmy was 8 months. We moved to Minnesota in the back of a pickup truck, my 7 brothers and me. It was the end of summer, 1962. We were moving to a place we had only known in July, visiting Mom's family, swimming in their cold lakes, and camping in a grove of pine trees that smelled like Christmas. But this trip would be different. It would be autumn soon. We'd heard tales of winter blizzards locking people inside their homes, pushing snowdrifts higher than the front door. Don't be ridiculous, Mom said, and tried to soften our fears with the news that soon we'd have our very own ice skating rink right outside the back door. You'll learn to love winter, I promise. We were city kids moving to the prairie because Dad's boss had decided to send his best salesman to the farmers of southwestern Minnesota. Dad was given a new pickup truck as his company vehicle. There were 8 of us kids in the back of the wide open truck, 9 if you count our dog Pepper, who weighed as much as a toddler. Before we could officially begin our trip up north, we had to make a short detour. We stopped to play tag with our Kansas City cousins and climb their apple trees one last time. Minnesota seemed so far away from Aunt Helen's backyard. She called us all to gather around her and gave us her treasured picnic basket. Now, kids, don't y'all start talking like those Yankees up north, you hear me? Aunt Helen grabbed me and held me too tight. "You start talking funny. All this on y'all, I mean it." "I promise, Aunt Helen, y'all don't have to worry about me. I'll never talk like that." That's the beginning of our coming to Minnesota.
Thank you. Can everybody hear? Okay. So I've been in printing for over 60 years, and I have a small letterpress shop in Montevideo, and I've done some little Z-books with people that I've done over the course of years. And almost 4 years ago, I came down with some health issues, and Patsy was kind enough to help go through all of the treatments. I had to have 6 rounds of chemo, and she kept talking about this book. Well, of course, all of us have heard about the book that she's been writing, and I didn't want to have anything to do with it, but she would send me these chapters and then come help take care of me, so I would start reading them and going from there. But she kept talking about publishing it, and I was like, well, you just get it done, you know? And I said, so why don't you publish it? And she goes, well, I have to find a publisher. And I was like, well, let's put together a little Z-book of the first chapter. So that's what we did, and Philip was going to help pass them out.
It's
We
all-
have one for every.
It's all printed on one sheet of paper.
Okay, it's a Z-book.
Yeah, he calls them my little books.
Yeah,
And the
take
way
it
they're
over.
folded, they fold up into a little book. Before that, as Philip's handing those out, I wanted to back up just a bit. Before Andy got involved, I still hadn't finished. I've been working on this since I was 13. Mostly, probably about 20 years ago, I got real serious about it. But I always had a few more chapters. And all my friends got sick of me saying I had this book, I had this book. And I retired from the University of Minnesota, and you'd think that I would finish writing it, but I didn't. And then during COVID, you'd think I had plenty of time to write, but I didn't. And then my high school classmate, Tom Frazee, his sister happens to be here, and she has the distinction of being the first customer of my book, because Tom bought it for her. And we gathered with some of our classmates, and he heard that was writing this book, and he said, well, how much longer do you need? We're not getting any younger, Patsy. And I said, well, probably by Christmas time. This was in April. And then he said, I'm giving you the deadline of July 4th. You got to have that book done. 3 months later, I had the book done, but then it's a whole different thing. Oh, over here. It's a whole different thing to have after you write it, then to get it published. And then that's where Andy came in.
Thank you, thank you. So in my mind, we would get this printed, and Patsy came and we worked on it in our letterpress shop, which takes a lot of work doing each letter and everything, and we printed it, and it didn't shut her up. Unfortunately, 6 months later, the cancer came back, and I had to have another round of a different type of deal. And anyway, she came down and helped with that, and I kept saying, well, why don't you just go ahead and publish it? Oh, I got one more chapter or something like that. And one night I woke up, and I've had the good fortune of working with a lot of artists in western Minnesota, and I worked with a poet who wanted to have me print the cover to her book and have one of the artists that we know do the drawing. And so that's what we did. And I called her and got some information about how do you do this stuff. So I called up Patsy and I said, well, let's just self-publish it. And she goes, oh, I don't have any money. And I said, well, I don't have any money either, but I got a shop and we can start running through. And so as we started, then we started selling them before they were published. But 3 of my other brothers called up right away and said they wanted to help. So we got the first edition printed through the help of a lot of people, and that's how it happened. kinds of samples of different little books that people are interested in doing a little book. They can contact me. They're very inexpensive. I like doing them. I do them on computer now because it's so much easier, and then I can have pictures of it. So I think that's about all I was going to explain about how we got it published, and I'll let her talk to you about what a taskmaster.
Yeah, so when Andy told me, we only had 3 months because there was an event in Bird Island that was featuring his letterpress. And so he said, you got 3 months, but that doesn't mean you got 3 months to put all the chapters together. I had written them all, but I hadn't put them all in the order that I wanted. And so it ended up being I had about 3 weeks to get all this together. And the printer has guidelines of how much time it would take. And they could do a 172-page book. So when it came down to it, I had to leave behind about 100 pages. So I still have about 100 pages that hopefully will make it into another edition. So that we've been doing this, we've been going to different libraries and senior centers, and I remember many times when I was writing this, I was thinking, who's going to want to read about a family in the 1960s, you know? But I'm surprised that people are interested in the story, and I like to say everybody has a story, and I'm sure all of you have a story, and so I'm just glad that thanks to Tom and Andy, I was able to get this out in the world. So anyway, does anybody have any questions at this point? Yes.
Time frame in your book?
The time frame is 10 years, from 1954 to 1955 to 1965, give or take. Any other questions before we go on? Yes.
What about your parents?
What about our parents? Yeah.
Crazy.
They both wanted a large family. They knew that. Mom was from a small family. She just had 2 brothers, but she wanted a large family. And our dad was a salesman, and so he got transferred. So we moved a few times. And in the book that didn't get in there, the picture on the cover is actually a picture of an abandoned convent that we lived in for a year and a half. Dad got transferred to southern Missouri, and we lived in this house because they couldn't find a place that he could rent in his territory that was big enough. At that time, there were 10 of us kids. And when they were looking for a place to live, they came around the corner out in the middle of nowhere. There was no town. It was called Germantown, but it wasn't really a town. But there was a convent, a church, a school, and a priest house. And Andy, being, I don't know, 5 years old or whatever, had to go to the bathroom. So Dad pulls over, and every church back then was open, no matter where. So he made us all get out of the car and go to the bathroom. And we came out, we couldn't find Dad. We went around all these, the school had a playground with the merry-go-round. And so we were all playing on that. Well, he had gone next door to the priest's house, and what intrigued him is that on the clothesline were diapers. Well, priests aren't married, so he wondered why there were diapers. So he knocked on the door, found out that was empty and the convent was empty, and so we rented the convent for $45 a month.
Where was that?
What?
Where was that?
That was in a place called Germantown, Missouri, southern Missouri. It was before we moved to Minnesota. The chapters are on the cutting room floor, but
It was the first time we could all have our own room.
It was.
We were all afraid to sleep alone.
Well, the upstairs was just hallway of these little bedrooms, and so Mom and Dad were at the bottom, at one end of the hallway, Mother Superior's room. It was really big, and mine was across the hall, and everybody else was up and down. Well, the first night, You'd hear pitter patter. Everybody came running down because they were afraid to sleep alone. We did have our own bedrooms. Our parents? No, no. Our father died in 1976. He was 52, and our mother about 20 years ago. But it was all a miracle that they lived as long as they did. And any other questions?
Where did you actually come from, or where did they actually start?
Mom and Dad. Dad was from Kansas City, Missouri, and Mom was from Duluth, or, well, by then, Northfield. Her father was the mayor of Northfield, and he was Lutheran. He and their family were Lutheran. My dad's family was Catholic, and if you know anything, back then, in the 1947 is when they got married. That was a bad thing. My grandpa Meldal did not like my father, and Mom converted to being a Catholic, and she never told her father. But anyway, they met in Kansas City and were married three months later and settled there, and that's, where 10 of us were born in Kansas City. So then from there, we moved to Minnesota, and the rest is in the book.
Obviously, they were very Catholic.
Oh, yes. But you know what? The Bird Island, where we ended up, there were quite a few Lutherans and Methodists in Bird Island, and many had large families. I think it was farm families that, that was the thing back then. It wasn't just Catholics, but that was, so. Any other questions?
What intrigued me about the book was that it seemed your father was always able to support his family. That was really, like, you never talked about having to not have something. Your father made it available for some reason.
For the most part, yeah. It was sometimes touch and go, but we never missed a meal. And I think we didn't know what we didn't have, because we had each other. And that was the important thing, is that we were each other's best friends, worst enemies at times, but mostly best friends. And we played together every day. Back then, you were outside from morning to night and played baseball every single day. And we had enough for our own team. Yeah, so, but after we got back together as a family, it was tough. It was, we never had a lot, but, there's a lot more than what money can buy, and we had each other, so. Yes?
I was impressed about how capable you were to take care of your younger siblings at a very young age, what you could do.
Well, do you hear the questions back there? Yeah. I think we were all like that back then, and because as an adult, I asked my mom, how could you have 12 kids? I just had one. And I thought, how could you be at home with all these little kids? And she said, well, honey, after the fourth one, you end up taking care of each other. So it wasn't that hard. I'm sure it was hard, but as far as us being able to take care of each other, from the time we were little, we were changing diapers, and our dad was kind of a benevolent dictator, and he liked to run the house like the army, whereas Mom was much more loosey-goosey and stuff, but he had a regimen, so we learned, there's a certain way to wash the dishes and stack them up and put them away, so, but I often thought, did you ever read the Boxcar Children as young? I had read that before this happened to us, and I always thought, yeah, we could take care of each other if we had to. So.
Sort of like the book Cheaper by the Dozen.
Yeah.
Did you ever read that?
Yeah, oh yeah. Any other questions? Yes?
Who was your proofreader and editor?
My writing group. I've had a writing group for a long time, so I didn't have to hire anybody. So there's one spelling error in the whole thing, but that's my fault. So we have any other questions? Yes.
You said you had 100 pages left. Do you have plans to do another book?
She does.
You know, it took me over 50 years to write this one. I don't think I have enough left in me, but I do have a lot of interest, and there are some interesting stories that what we've thought about doing is doing an expanded edition, and because the time frame is during this time frame, so.
Do you have stories of your parents and what they went through before you all came along?
When they got married and before we were all,
Yeah, like your father's life and your mother's life before they.
their lives weren't as interesting as ours was.
It's part of the story.
Yeah, well, how they met was interesting and that kind of stuff, so. And I have 11 other siblings, and any one of them could step up and write. Two of my sisters are quite a bit younger than I am, and their only criticism of the book is that I didn't write about what happened after we got back together in Rhode Island, and I said, well, that's for you to write. But so far nobody stepped up, except we do have our youngest brother, Jim, worked for the Minnesota Twins for, I don't know how many years, 15, and he worked for the Montreal. He was in baseball. He has quite a massive amount of stories. And
Joe Mauer days.
What?
Joe Mauer days.
Joe Mauer days, yeah. He took care of Joe Mauer, and so he's starting to compile his stories. So he'll be the next one that have a book. Now that Andy knows how to print.
You said there was a Catholic high school in Rhode Island?
Oh yeah.
Where is that, or is it still there?
Building's still there.
Bird Island's still there.
I've never seen that school, I just didn't know it was Rhode Island.
So the high school is still next to the church,
Oh, it
and there
is.
was a grade school in the
It's
back.
now the grade school.
Yeah.
Yeah, now it's a grade school in Bird Island.
Okay, all right.
That's what we remember. And I remember when we first moved up here, we went to Granite Falls, which was a public school, and we went from a parochial school to a public school. So when you got called on, you stood up and answered next to your desk, or you said, yes, sister, or no, sister. Well, in the public school, everybody laughs at you when you do that. And then after being there for however long we were in Granite, going back to parochial school and getting called on and just sitting at your desk going, yes, I know. And then they tell you, stand up, young man, you know. And Patsy has a story of the same type of thing with Carl. I remember that.
Yeah, so when we moved to Granite Falls, we didn't have time to get acclimated. We started school 2 days after we got there, and Carl was in my class for some reason. He's a year older, and so after our first few of the classes, we could figure out that the kids didn't jump up and say their name and answer the question, but not Carl. He's called on and he stands up and he starts reciting and everybody's laughing, and I'm like, oh, my brother. But the other thing that is not in the book, but we all had Southern accents, and so when you move to southwestern Minnesota, people would, oh, there's that girl that talks funny going down the hallway. And so somebody brave enough would stop me and say something. What should I say? What's your name? Patsy Kahman. And they'd say, now where is the post office in Granite Falls? And I'd say, downtown. So they gave me a lot of grief about it. It didn't take me long to lose my accent. But when I've been in Kansas City for a few hours, I can get it back. So.
How long were you separated in foster homes, and why does it say mistakenly?
Oh, well, you have to read the book. 75 days. But when you're a young child, that can feel like forever. Because we never knew.
For those of us that haven't read the book,
Yeah.
can you tell us the story now?
Sure. Well, how about if I just read a little bit?
I'd like to.
Okay. So after we moved, 16 months later, we're living in a farmhouse near Granite Falls. It is January 7th, 1964. On a normal day, the unfinished snow fort would have called us outside after school. We'd have been out there beside the barn where the drifts piled high until Mom thought it was too dark and called us in for supper. The prairie let us open up and shriek as loud as we needed to without bothering anyone. 600 acres of frozen fields lay between us and the nearest neighbors. 1 square mile of nothing, but it was a nothing that belonged to us. The fields didn't belong to us, and technically the barn didn't either. We were only renting the farmhouse, but Dad said nobody owned the sky, so we claimed it, all that empty space. Tuesday morning came early, dark and frigid. Our parents had plans to drive Grandma and Grandpa to Minneapolis, over 100 miles away. Grandpa had a doctor's appointment at the VA hospital and wasn't supposed to be driving anymore. Dad and I both looked up as headlights from the driveway trailed across the cupboards. We could hear the crunch of tires on hard snow. I ran to the dining room window and watched Grandpa's big white 1957 Chevy stop just inches short of the back porch steps. "That man is a menace behind the wheel," Dad muttered. "Somebody should take his keys away." Carl was standing at the window next to me and saw Grandpa slide on a patch of ice. We started to laugh. "Big toe, Lord." "Carl, don't let Mom hear you say that." I turned from the window to give Mom and Dad a hug and kiss goodbye. Dad slipped me an envelope with loose change in it for milk money for all the kids. And then they were out the door. Suddenly I felt this urge to call Mom back for one last hug. It seemed like I needed to ask her something. I wasn't sure what. I only knew I needed her back on the porch just for a minute. But Dad was impatient, and he surely would have yelled. It didn't make sense. They had left many times before, and I had not felt the shakiness deep inside. All morning I had this feeling I couldn't shake. Third period English class, our assignment, silent reading. But for me, the words shimmered on the page. I yearned to close the book. Suddenly, a shrieking sound shattered the classroom. Intercom. Its buzzing jerked Miss Hannah to attention. "Patricia, you must go to the principal's office this minute." I had already stood up. My brother Eric was seated outside the principal's door, and the secretary escorted us into his office and motioned for us to sit down. She left us in there with a stern-looking man as she closed the door behind her carefully. "Your parents have been in an accident. They were hit by a truck. Your mother," he stopped, and my world stopped. "Your mother has been hurt bad. They don't know if she will live." A priest was with her and gave her the last rites. "You kids might as well get back to class. There's nothing you can do." Later that gray afternoon, Carl, Eric, and I stood on the porch of our home when we should have been playing in the snow fort. Instead, we watched as strangers took our brothers and sisters away, one by one. Andy went in this car, Johnny went in that. I could not bear to look at them as they were placed in separate cars. One by one, children were ushered out the door. We never did anything one by one. We had been taking care of each other, always together. How could I handle my mom dying and not have my brothers and sisters beside me? That's part of the story. Do we have any other questions? Yes.
Are your siblings all still in Minnesota?
No, they're all over. We have Andy's here, Philip's here, I'm here. I have a brother Eric. Who else? Then we have a sister in Boston, a brother in Oregon, 2 brothers in Florida, a sister and a brother in St. Louis, and our oldest Carl is in Canada.
How did the foster system get involved in that situation?
You have to read the book. I do, yeah. Just briefly, it was the local priest had called people to come and take care of us. Though there was a couple from down the road that had come to, every Sunday we'd have them over for dinner, but they were Lutheran, and so the priest said no. They had offered to come and stay with us to keep us together, and he said no, they were Lutheran, and so they sent us all away. Other questions? Yes.
Grandchildren are from your parents.
You know, when I was gonna count, my mom always thought she didn't have enough grandchildren because she thought with 12 kids she should have like 50 or whatever. I only have one child, happily, one child.
I have two, and my daughter Sunshine was the first
First
grandchild,
grandchild. Yeah.
but not by much.
Yeah. I'll have to add it and I'll get back to you. So maybe some didn't have, I really wish for my daughter's sake that I could have had a large, so she could have had a lot of brothers and sisters. She had a lot of cousins, not as many as our brothers and sisters, but that was a different time. It would be hard to raise that many kids now, and but we were blessed. We were blessed to have such a large family and all these stories. I know Andy tells a story because a lot of people want to know. Now, coming from a smaller town, a lot of you might have grown up on a farm, or knowing that back then you were lucky to have one bathroom in the house. But other people that are contemporaries or younger want to know, how did you live in a house with one bathroom?
I know what an outhouse is.
You know what an outhouse is, yeah.
Well, people would ask me, and I didn't recognize that there were houses with more than one bathroom. But, when you grow up, Patsy was one of the older ones, and she got up early all the time. And then the rest of us were boys, and we were just shuffled in. You first eat, or you go to the bathroom, you come out, and you get ready for school. So it was always, there was always somebody in the bathroom, but you didn't recognize that until you left home. And even now, some smaller houses, 2 bathrooms aren't enough. But that's one of the biggest questions that we got from some of the other book clubs is how'd you survive in that? And you didn't know any difference. So.
And I was fortunate because I was the only girl for several years. My sisters were born later. So I was surrounded by all these boys. And Dad had
She was the queen.
It was called Princess. And so Dad had a rule that boys couldn't hit girls. And that's a good rule to have, right? Boys should not hit girls. And so I took quite advantage of that.
She did.
What was the other thing, living in a big family, by the time I was in high school, I didn't have to wash dishes anymore because there were enough younger ones. And to this day, I love washing dishes because I didn't have to do it in high school. So that was just.
What were your feelings as your parents were gone? Just gone. What was your feelings of bewilderment?
It was kind of terror, because we had never spent a night away from each other,
And why didn't they tell you what was happening?
Back then, they didn't really think about kids that much, I think they thought, well, they're taken care of. I remember asking Aunt Helen, who lived in Liberty, Missouri, years later, and she was mortified because she didn't realize, being so far away, phone calls were a rarity. And I don't even think we knew her phone number. We didn't know who to call when it happened. We had only lived here a year and a half, so we didn't have the benefit of a lot of neighbors and family. Mom's family was in Minneapolis, and so, it was kind of like, well, the kids have a warm place to stay. Yeah.
And I don't know, are there many Catholics out there, but we were Catholic at the time, and if the priest said something, that's what happened. So he came in, and he had only been in Granite for 4 months, I think, and he found this as an opportunity to show that he, you know, could do some stuff.
Run the show.
Yeah, run the show, and so he wanted it that way, and so nobody questioned him. Of course, we couldn't question him, and we just were shuffled off, and it's really hard to answer your question because some of those feelings come up now. Like I just visited Carl, Philip, and I went up and visited Carl in Nipigon, Ontario, and he has yet to sit down and read the book because he can't. And I know Patsy has asked him questions, and we did talk a little bit about some stuff, but for some reason he just has a hard time reading the
So
book.
you don't talk about those
We
things
never did.
as kids.
We didn't talk for 35 years, I think, except Patsy. She,
Yeah, I
do you remember this? And she's writing it down and everything. Oh, it's Patsy in her book.
Yes.
In our family, it's interesting to see when you start talking about family memories, how each of us see it in a different way.
Yeah.
Like my younger sisters will see something as being a big deal, and as an older one,
Yeah.
does that happen?
Yeah, she was talking about in a larger family or a spread out family, siblings have different views, and I've run across that, yes. The youngest one, fortunately I'm one of the older ones, so I have the stories. I was there, or I didn't make it up because it's a memoir, but you know, I have been challenged. Once the book came out, my brother John's read it, and he said, I wasn't 3 years old at that time, I was 8. I said, okay.
He called me first to let me know. And I said, John, Patsy told me early on, if you want it, you can write your own book. He was upset because he wasn't 3 years old.
But in such a spread out family, our younger siblings had different parents than us older ones. You know, our parents were young and vibrant and healthy, and we had, you know, we'd go on family trips in the summer, and the younger siblings, our parents were disabled, and you know, totally different. Not totally. I mean, their hearts were the same, but a different experience. So that's why I tell them they can write their own book, and they may. But Carl, somebody in one of the book clubs I went to, two women, they said they called Carl their hero. And I'm thinking, Carl's my older brother, I don't, you know, a hero? And they said the fact that he kept the priest there. Those of you that read it, there's a scene where he has a shotgun and he keeps the priest from... There was a chance that we wouldn't have gotten back together. And the priest and some of the parents that were parenting our siblings wanted to keep that particular child, and they were trying to convince my father that they were too disabled for us to get back together. And for a few hours there was this panic. And nobody remembers that Carl was telling this story as an adult, and we were with some other friends, and I didn't know that part of the story. I do remember that day Dad being panicked, and it was supposed to be an easy transition. People were going to bring us out to the farmhouse, and Dad just got in the car and drove frantic around the town to pick everybody up. 11 kids in a car. You know, no seatbelts back then. But Carl's story was, as he was telling this group of people, he likes to embellish. He's the one, we all are somewhat storytellers, but Carl is the embellisher. So he's telling these people, yeah, I had to take the shotgun and keep that priest from leaving. So I'm like,
it was really a 22.
and I hadn't heard that part of the story, and of course I'm in the midst of kind of finishing the book. So the next day we're driving, and I said, okay, Carl, I want to get the story straight because it's going in the book and I want it to be true. And he said, oh, you know, I hate to talk about it. I said, I don't care. This is the last time you have to talk about it, but I want to get it. I said, did you really hold the priest at, you know, at bay with a gun? He said, well, not quite. They said the gun was in the corner, and Dad had pointed to it when he left and said, "Don't let him leave." So he kept him occupied. So Dad was able to get us all back. Yes?
Did all of your siblings want you to share your stories?
I've never been asked that. What do you think, Bill?
Absolutely.
Andy?
No, I never wanted to, because we never talked about it. And then I end up, go figure.
Well, and I have to say, those of you that read the story, you know that Andy's the one with the hand accident.
How is your hand?
It's still there.
Wow.
Those that haven't read it, when he was 2 years old, he got his hand cut off. And it got reattached, and it was the first time they had ever medically done that. And I always knew that it was an important story to tell, and I had gotten a lot of the information from Mom. I was only 5 at the time. I remember everything as vividly as I was able to write it, but there were some scenes where I was at the hospital, and so that one took me a long time, and I still hadn't written it when Andy said he was going to publish the book, and then I knew I had to get his story told. So I wrote it, and I got furious.
Up until then, I'm reading them going, good, that's not in there. Because I never talked about it.
Yeah.
Hardly ever.
And Andy had his deadlines, and you could tell this part where you would call me or text me.
Well, she wouldn't take my calls, then I would text her or email her and say, where are we on the next chapter, because this is when we want it, this is when we have to have it to the formatter, this is when it goes to the printer, and they need X amount of time. And so then I would text her, and finally she would answer me, oh, I just finished it.
And so the very last part was part about his hand, and I sent it to him late at night. That was the deadline. And it turns out it was his birthday. I didn't realize that when I was finishing it frantically that day. And I sent it to him and I said, okay, Andy, if you don't want this out there, because I know as a kid he would always hide his hand, and he would wear long sleeves. He didn't want a picture taken of his hand, even though it looked perfectly fine, but as a kid you just don't want to be different. And so I was giving him the option. I said, I have 100 other pages I can plug in here, but I think it's important for your story to be told. And so he
I plugged it in there, I did not read it till it came out of the book. Because it's her book.
But it's your story.
Were you able ever to kind of interview your parents after all of this about what their feelings were, or did they not know?
Yeah, my dad wrote it all down. He was the one that encouraged me. He wanted me to be a writer, and so he encouraged me, and I promised him I would write the story, and so I got a lot of information from him. I got a lot of information from Mom about certain things. So they both they felt it was important that the story be told.
Were they angry about this, or?
Yeah.
I think our dad.
I don't think he ever recovered emotionally, because to him, when he was young, when he was 6 years old, his mother was sent to a hospital for 2 years, and he was sent to his grandfather's. So he had this fear of being split up with his siblings. And we all knew that story, and so we all knew, and he made it so important that we did everything together. We prayed together, we, sang together, and I think that was, was the worst possible thing that could happen to him, is to come home and find his kids missing.
Did they never recover? I mean,
They did. Well, yes.
physically, I mean.
Yeah, Mom had probably 20 surgeries. She was amazing. She went on to after Dad died, she still had 4 or 5 kids in high school, and Philip, she was still raising him, and she got a job at the county, Renville County, and did that, and Philip, he's the one of all of us that, he was only 3 when we got split up, and none of us knew what family he went to, and he was too young to know the name, you know. So in the book, he's the one I feel, you know, a little bit haunted by, that I don't know what his experience was. So, but.
Is your house still there in Rhode Island?
No. In fact, anybody from Rhode Island that, if they have any pictures, we lived right across from the Methodist church, and it was an old house, as I write about in the book. And to me, it looked haunted from the outside. We did paint it, but, and you went to the church, so do you remember that house? No? The church. Yeah. We my brothers had it torn down after Dad died, and then they built a house for Mom. Yes.
Hi, Patsy.
Hi.
I've been curious ever since I, got your book when you first let it out. And the picture on the cover, I thought, is that house in Rhode Island? Because I don't remember that house. And so yesterday I was on my way to Olympia to see a friend that's in the hospital over there. And so I thought, I'm driving past there to see it. And I don't think that house is even there anymore, is it?
No, we tore it down.
Okay.
And my brothers, the older ones, were in construction, and they built Mom a house. And that's where the youngest ones finished growing up. So that house is long gone. The house, as I told a few people before, and the house on the cover is the convent, the abandoned convent that we lived in for 1.5 years. But I thought it was the best looking house, so that's why I put it on the cover. So the next edition will have the stories about the convent, which, by the way, was haunted. Yeah. Any other questions? Yes?
Are you and your siblings close still today?
I can't stand some of them. Yeah, we are.
Not
12 kids.
Yeah, they're all
12 kids
over.
in 13 years.
What?
You do the math.
Yeah, emotionally we're very close. We, sometimes can't stand each other as families are, but nobody's gonna come between us. And because of the internet, our brother Carl moved to Canada years ago, and he lives as far north as you can go out of Nipigon. And when the internet came up, hard to believe there was a time before that, he was one of the first ones that got us all connected. For years we hadn't seen him. I mean, years could go by before we'd see him, because even phone calls were expensive. But he got everybody on the internet, and that kind of kept us connected. I remember when 9/11 happened, it was Carl calling from Canada. You're not going to believe what's happening. And he was making, connecting everybody through that day. We just wanted to make sure everybody was okay. So, yeah, I think we have kind of a protective thing that we're always wanting to make sure everybody's okay. I think our mother kept us together physically more when she was alive. We'd always go to her house, but after she died, it was harder to get us all together. I think everybody can maybe relate to that. But I have to say that the sibling bond is pretty amazing. And if you're fortunate to have siblings, treasure them, even when you want to hit them. So, any other questions? Yes.
I have one. Did people comment about the size of your family negatively to your family? Because I know people did to my parents. So I came from a large family too. And then when my father passed away young, they all said to Mom, "Oh, you're so lucky you have all those children that support you and take care of you." And, it was just, she was on the other foot.
Yeah. In fact, I even remember in Kansas City, Mom tended to have a child every year, and these ladies would come knocking on the door, and I found out later they were from an organization called Planned Parenthood. It was probably called something else back then. But yeah, but in the smaller towns, everybody, I mean, it was not an unusual thing so much, so. Any other questions?
How many years between oldest to youngest?
Carl, it was 14 when Beth was born, so 14 years. Yeah. Yeah.
You know, you talk about families in your question, but I've done my family history and been to Denmark and Germany to do research.
Mm-hmm.
And one thing in talking to people and historians and people that knew history, they said to me that families that immigrated, even before they came with a lot of children. If there were children that they had before that didn't survive because of famine or disease or whatever. But back in those days, in the 1800s, they kept having children because they needed children, boys, to help with whatever, girls to farm out where there were no girls back then. So having large families was not unheard of.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
And I remember one of the families that lived near us in Granite Falls that we got to know. It wasn't real large, I think it was 8 or 9 kids, but when we went over to visit, all the girls did all the housework and all the boys worked outside. Well, because we kind of lived on a farm place, but we all had to wash dishes, change diapers, sweep the floor, and I just found that the boys would come in and sit down and just expect to be waited on by the sisters to feed them, and I thought, wow, that wouldn't work in our house.
Our mother was a feminist before that was a thing.
I like your stories about your babysitters. You had
Oh,
some in Kansas City,
yeah.
but then the chapter about
Jimmy Maines.
yes, about the high school boy, and then you were young, like 8 years old, and you had to take care of all the little ones
Yeah.
in the roller rink.
Roller rink, yeah.
I
Yeah.
thought,
Yeah.
after that, how you kept them all, you managed them all until, but then your dad said, yes, I know you love him, but he never babysat for you.
I know, yeah. Yeah. I have one more little story to tell that didn't make it into the book. I read to you the beginning of when we moved to Minnesota in a pickup truck. The rest of that night, it was evening time before we got on the road. We had 500 miles before we could get to Granite Falls, and we all fell asleep. You know, there was a refrigerator, an ice box, they called it back then, and then the washing machine, and they were filled with our clothes because we were going to start school in 2 days. And instead of suitcases, we had everything packed in there, and we were all on top of all the blankets and pillows and everything. And you know, because if anybody has ever ridden in a pickup truck in the back, some of you know how it's like windy and you can't talk. So we all just settled down and fell asleep. And Philip was beside me. He was just 2 years old. And all of a sudden, it was pitch dark, this crack of thunder, and this water, the rain just came down like a spigot. It was coming off the refrigerator, and it was, Philip had his mouth open. Literally, he was drowning. I picked him up, and he was limp, and I had to hit him on the back. And Dad's still driving like a maniac, and I'm pounding on the window, and Mom's looking at me, and I'm thinking, why won't they stop? Philip's drowning. He got to the next town, which happened to be Storm Lake, Iowa, and every town, every small town has 2 things besides a store. They have a laundromat and a bar, and usually they're next to or near each other. So Dad went to the town square, and he went into the bar and found who owned the laundromat. And they came and opened it up for us. It was about midnight, and we had to dry everything, get back on the road, and I just looked up at the stars, and I knew as long as I could see the stars, we wouldn't have another rainstorm. But once we got to Olivia, turning off on Highway 71 to 2:12, and Dad had to pull under this awning because it was starting to rain again. So we got to Granite Falls, it was probably 4 in the morning or something. That was our invitation to Minnesota. I've come to love Minnesota, but at that time I was. Any other questions before we have people come up and willing to sign your book if you bought one before?
You had mentioned grandparents at one point in time. Where were they? Were they back in Kansas?
Grandparents? Yeah, our dad's parents were in Kansas City, and Mom and Dad's parents, they lived in Hanley Falls, and so they were with Mom and Dad when the accident happened. So they were also in the accident.
So how many people here are from a large family?
Well,
That was my next question. What's large? 8? 7?
My brother married someone from a family of 18.
Oh, okay.
There was a family in Bolivia.
She's said 12. She's Rodels, right?
Yes.
Rodels,
Oh.
yeah.
Yep.
Yes.
I was waving at Grace.
My daughter-in-law was in the family for 21.
Oh my goodness. That's got some stories. Did you want us to keep going, or you want
If there's more questions, a few more questions.
any more questions before we can?
You did tell them there wasn't going to be food.
I promised him song and dance, though.
Last chance for questions.
I don't have a question.
Yes.
Growing up in Rhode Island, there was always the division between a public school and St. Mary's. And when I was about sophomore, junior in high school, they had brought in some speaker, I don't know who he was or whatever, but we met in the auditorium and they invited St. Mary's to come over. So all of us public school kids sat on this side of the gym. We couldn't look or touch or anything. And the Catholic school kids came in and sat over here. And when the speaker came up, the entire Catholic side of the school stood up and applauded, and we all sat there like bimbos. And we didn't know if we should stand or not, and so we didn't. But that was the difference between being raised with the proper respect when you're introduced. I'll just never forget it. We just sat there like.
And you do know why the difference, why it was always said.
Well, they were going to
You guys were going to go to hell. That's what we were. I felt sorry
On that note, thank you again for coming. Thank you again for the Friends of the Hutchinson Public Library for sponsoring.